Okay, seeing as it is now 1 o'clock on the East Coast, we'll go ahead and get started with our virtual seminar today. We want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your day to come and participate in the Center for Disaster Research virtual seminar. Today we have the pleasure of having Chris Walsh, who is the current Emergency Management Coordinator for Washington County, Oregon, and the former State Meteorologist for the state of Georgia. So I'll introduce him and then I'll give the floor to him. So Chris began working in emergency management in 2004 when he joined the Federal Emergency Management Agency as a reservist and member of the Hurricane Liaison team. He joined the Georgia Emergency Management Agency in 2005 as a Hurricane Program Manager and State Meteorologist. In 2012, Chris began working for Washington County, Oregon Emergency Management as an Emergency Management Coordinator. In 2004, he graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology. As an undergraduate, Chris received a NASA Space Grant Consortium Fellowship, which provided an opportunity to conduct experimental ocean wave modeling at the Naval Research Laboratory. Additionally, Chris volunteered with the National Severe Storms Laboratory during the TELEX lightning experiment. In graduate school, Chris was a graduate research assistant for both the NOAA National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center and the University of Oklahoma's Center for Spatial Analysis. So without further ado, Mr. Chris Walsh, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Am I being heard correctly?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's 10 a.m. here Pacific Standard Time, so I just finished my first cup of coffee, so you've got me fully caffeinated, so I hope I don't speak too quickly in today's presentation. But I appreciate this opportunity to speak with everyone who is hearing this. I wish I could be speaking in front of you in person so I could observe the people who are present to hear this presentation, but it is an honor for me to offer this, and I hope that people walk away with some new information about how meteorology and emergency management can be connected. And so my goal here today is to demonstrate how the Georgia Emergency Management Agency integrated an on-staff meteorologist to support operations, not only for real-time incident support with forecasting and such, which I'll talk about, but also for day-to-day routine operations. So what I want you guys to take away from this is that not only is there opportunities for meteorologists to provide your standard level forecast and meteorological expertise, but there are broader implications in emergency management that are weather related that are of significance. And so I understand that recently the Pennsylvania Department of Emergency Management has hired a full-time staff meteorologist, and that represents a good step forward for that organization because there is a lot of benefit to having on-staff meteorological expertise. So I'm going to go through this presentation this afternoon, and I'm going to highlight a lot of the work that I did while I spent 7 years with Georgia and talk about how they integrated the on-staff meteorologist. And to be perfectly honest, I was the first person in that role at that agency. So when I came on board, I didn't actually have a lot of direction, and I wasn't able to kind of gather my tasks and work to align with their vision for what that was for that organization because they were still trying to figure that out for themselves. So a lot of the things that you'll see in my presentation are things that I created as I worked there because I saw opportunities, and that's really important. You know, as a meteorologist, when you see ways that expertise can be integrated into other work, that kind of synergy is extremely important. So I think you'll get a lot of that from this presentation. So let's see if I can work this software. Okay, so I hope you're seeing the slide that starts with About Me. I was a student at the University of Oklahoma. I attended there for just about 3 years because I did my undergrad work, or some of my undergrad work in California. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology. I had minors in mathematics and hydrology. I started grad school, but I left grad school for the job opening in Georgia, so I didn't complete the master's program, but I started it. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to serve at the National Storm Prediction Center to do work there. It's always interesting the types of experimental research that are being done at these different labs, like the National Severe Storms Lab at the National Storm Prediction Center. I had the opportunity to work on a product that they're actually still using called MARS, which is an acronym for Map Analog Retrieval System. And essentially, it's a product that looks at similar weather patterns and then gathers from a database events that occurred after that forecast. So were there severe storms that occurred? Did they produce damages in the form of storm reports, tornado observations, hail observations, etc.? And they were trying to use that product to try to see if this modeled a similar event in the past that had a large-scale severe weather outbreak. And so I got to work on that product, and that was a lot of fun for me. So I highly encourage anyone out there who's actually approaching a meteorology degree to seek out opportunities with local weather service or other organizations involved in weather. And so I tried to do as many of those opportunities when I was in college. Let's see. Okay, so why emergency management? This is the next slide now. I was in college. It was my second semester, and I was studying for finals. And there happened to be a large-scale tornado outbreak that occurred in the plains on May 8th, and it was primarily targeting Kansas. So all of my friends in college who were storm chasers decided to head off to Kansas, and I decided to stay home and be a good student and study. And as it turns out, while I was studying for my dynamics final, a severe tornadic thunderstorm came into our county. And so I figured, you know, as a second semester meteorology student from California who'd never really seen a severe thunderstorm, that I would go ahead and put myself directly in the path of an F3 tornado, which is what happened. And it was stupid because I didn't know, you know, severe storm scale dynamics. I didn't understand storm structure, and so I put myself in a bad position unknowingly. And so I found myself about a quarter of a mile from where this F3 tornado touched down, and I literally had to run for my life to get away from this tornado. And I found this graphic on the screen of the tornado, and the scene you're looking at is the same moment in time when I was literally running for my life. So as a result, I got free of the path of the tornado, but I saw the path of destruction that this tornado caused, and I saw the destruction it caused even before first responders arrive on scene. So I observed damaged and destroyed homes, people pulling themselves out of the rubble, fires, just a scene of utter chaos. And it kind of was that moment of enlightenment for me where I recognized what meteorology was for me. And meteorology for me was emergency management. It was about being able to apply my knowledge and expertise in a way that helped society, and it helped society in a way that helped them recover from these devastating events that we can't prevent, but we can help people recover from and stay alive. So that was where I found my calling. That's why I chose emergency management. I wanted to be a part of the weather industry that actually helped people recover from incidents and disasters, and so that's where my path began. So my career history as follows. I spent 6 months trying to find out how someone becomes an emergency manager because I was a meteorology student. I had no idea. And I ended up getting in touch with the Deputy Regional Director of FEMA Region 6 in Denton, Texas, Gary Jones. And I just asked him for an interview as a naive student. I said, you know, I'm just a naive student. I don't know anything about emergency management, and you're someone who's obviously successful because you're at the top of a FEMA region, so I want to know how you became you. And I traveled from Norman, Oklahoma down to Denton, Texas, and I spent an hour and a half with Gary in his office, and I interviewed him and just asked a bunch of questions about how he became an emergency manager and what work does FEMA do. And the outcome from that meeting was that I got an opportunity to join FEMA as a reservist, and that following summer they deployed me to the region for an active disaster, and I got to work in their program. So while I was there, I was introduced to the FEMA Region 4, which is out of Atlanta, Georgia. Their hurricane program manager, a guy named Brock, and I got to spend some time with him during the summer working, and so I got to know him, and as a result of that relationship that I built, that connection that I made, when the job opportunity became available with GEMA, Georgia Emergency Management, I applied for it and I got it. I was very lucky. So I got hired on as their hurricane program manager and state meteorologist, and that's the beginning of this story. So let's talk a little bit about ways that I was able to integrate myself as a meteorologist into emergency management. One of the things that became evident over the course of my first year at GEMA was that I got an understanding that Georgia has a lot of severe weather events. They have almost every year there is some type of disaster that occurs as a result of flooding or ice storms or most especially severe weather outbreaks. And I found myself in a position to give a lot of briefings to the response staff, to the executive level leadership, and to external organizations. And as a recognition of that role that I was playing, I decided that I would create this product called the GEMA 1-Minute Weather Outlook. And it was a daily forecast that I would provide, and it wasn't my own forecast. It was basically an aggregation of different forecast information from official sources like the National Storm Prediction Center, the River Forecast Center, the National Weather Service offices. And I would basically just aggregate that information, summarize it, and put it in a report and send it out to people within the organization. And my philosophy was that weather data doesn't have to be time-consuming. It doesn't have to be something that requires a significant amount of time and effort to gather. And so emergency managers are busy people. They have large workloads, and they don't have the time necessarily to surf multiple websites to gather the information they need to determine if there is some type of weather threat that day or in the coming days. So the target audience for this product was the emergency management community, and my goal was to provide them with any threat assessment information that was found in forecasts that I could present to them in a quick, easy format so that they could just spend a minute or two in the morning, look at this report, find out if there were any threatening weather events, and then move on with their work. And that ended up being a very successful approach, and it ended up reaching, going outside the organization over the years. It extended to public and private sector organizations, local emergency management, state-level emergency management. And so I think when I left, I had over 60 organizations that were receiving this little morning email that I would send out that would aggregate these products into a simple product. So, you know, having that expertise, having the understanding of all of the different forecast products out there, being able to extract risk information from them about threatening weather and then presenting it to the emergency management community that has to respond to this information and prepare for it. That was one of the key aspects of the position of state meteorologist. And so this product is still something that GEMA does, even though I have left GEMA for many years now. They still create this product every day and put it out because it's found value to a lot of their stakeholders. So that was definitely one of the successes of my tenure there. Event briefings. So, you know, we had numerous weather threats during the 7 years that I was there. Winter and spring were the two active periods for us for weather, but fall also because of tropical weather. And so whenever there was a threatening incident, our goal was always to align the decision makers with the National Weather Service experts. It was never me that was actually giving, well, I won't say never. There were times when I gave event briefings, but my goal was usually to try to line up the National Weather Service forecasters with the emergency response community so that they could receive an official briefing about the threatening weather. I felt that was very important because people who are in the position to make decisions, if you look at behavioral science, people who are in positions to make decisions need to have valid information, and valid information to them is something they feel is official, credible, reliable, etc. And so when the data comes from an official source like the National Weather Service Forecast Office, that's credible information that they can act on. So my job was always to align the National Weather Service offices in Georgia with the decision makers and set up those briefings and set up those events and be the person who was the liaison between Georgia Emergency Management, Weather Service, etc. And depending on the event, that structured who was giving the briefing. If it was a tropical weather threat, we would line up the National Hurricane Center. If it was a severe storm event, it would either be the local National Weather Service office, or if it was a very high-level threat event, like, say, a high risk issued by the National Storm Prediction Center. On a few occasions, we even had the National Storm Prediction Center on the phone giving the briefing. And that is the expert-level information that the decision makers needed. But they also needed me afterwards to help interpret at times. Oftentimes you get pulled aside and they say, well, what do you think? What does this mean? I didn't quite understand what they said. Oftentimes decision support is the role that a state meteorologist plays. You're there to help interpret information, explain it, make it clear so that they truly understand the threat at hand. One of the challenges that I faced in Georgia was that our state covered 6 National Weather Service office territories. And the Weather Service, I use the word territories because the Weather Service is justifiably territorial. If there is a threat in, say, northwest Georgia, then the Peachtree City Weather Service office is the one that wants to give the briefing. The challenge for us was always when a threat event covered multiple Weather Service jurisdictions, and then trying to align all of the offices onto one conference call so that they can give a joint briefing. And then the Weather Service offices obviously had issues with that because they didn't ever want to present a forecast that the neighboring office disagreed with. So it took effort on my part to contact the warning coordination meteorologists from the different offices and make sure that they're connected and sharing their information so that when they jump onto our state briefing, they're all in alignment and speaking with one voice. And if you have people in a position to make decisions who are getting conflicting information, that's going to undermine their ability to make a good decision. So you want to hedge that issue in advance by making sure that the offices are coordinating. Another role the state meteorologist plays. So 6 Weather Service offices in the state, depending on the threat, would if it was an oncoming tropical system, we would let the coastal Weather Service offices brief first. If it was an approaching severe weather event or an ice storm event that was coming from the north, we'd let the Peachtree City office brief first. Those little event details in the briefings were kind of just little things that needed to be touched on and coordinated pre-call. And so that was a challenge I faced. And then throw on top of that 2 additional national weather centers, the National Hurricane Center and the National Storm Prediction Center, and it just adds another level of complexity that decision makers don't want to face. They want the state meteorologist to just handle it and then step into a room, receive a briefing, and get their information. And so those are all really critical roles that I played in establishing their event briefings. Okay, so we faced incidents, we faced weather outbreaks, we faced damaging storms. The states typically have some type of emergency operations center. In Georgia, it's called the State Emergency Operations Center, or the SOC. And they use the emergency management structure called the National Incident Management System. Specifically, how they structure their emergency operations centers, they use a system called the Incident Command System, or ICS. And that gives a nationally recognized and nationally coordinated system of response. And what you're seeing on the screen now is how that structure exists. So you have an incident commander who's tasked with leading the entire event, planning section tasked with information management, and management of technical specialists. And if you're a meteorologist, you're not a standard position within ICS, so you're a technical specialist, and that falls within planning. So as a result, whenever we had weather events in Georgia, I was a technical specialist, and I was in planning section, and so I would line up event briefings during the event. I would support creating weather forecasts for our incident action planning, and I would be there available as a resource to any of the people within the Emergency Operations Center who had questions about the weather, about the forecast, about what was happening, so that I could continue to feed them current and accurate information. Another opportunity that came to me while when I started with FEMA in 2004, before I joined the Georgia Emergency Management, was a team that I'm still affiliated with, which is the Hurricane Liaison team. The Hurricane Liaison team is a team of meteorologists / emergency managers who deploy to either FEMA Regional Response Coordination Centers, RRCCs, or they call them R2C2s. And you serve either as a risk analyst in the R2C2, or you serve as a hurricane liaison team member at the Central Pacific Hurricane Center or the National Hurricane Center in Miami. And so I had the opportunity to, and I continue to have the opportunity to go to these national centers or these regional response centers and serve as a decision support element. So the idea of the hurricane liaison team is when you have a major threatening hurricane to the United States or its territories, and you have emergency managers who need information about that incident, about that event, about the forecasts, they can call the hurricane liaison team and get the information they need such that the hurricane specialists at the National Hurricane Center or Central Pacific, the hurricane specialists don't have to step away from their jobs as meteorologists. So we're kind of a liaison, we're a conduit. We support briefings from the National Hurricane Center. We receive calls from government officials and emergency managers to provide them with up-to-date information. And we do the same thing within the regional response coordination centers. We serve as risk analysts. We brief the executive level management about the threats and feed them the information they need when they need it. This element is stood up by FEMA every time there's a threatening tropical system. A piece of work that I did while I was in Georgia, and this is still something that's really a national need, is to align outdoor warning system practices. This is still something that I see as very fragmented along the East Coast and the Southeast. Each jurisdiction that has purchased and operates an outdoor warning system doesn't necessarily operate it and test it the same way their neighboring jurisdiction does, or jurisdictions many states away. And the reason that's a problem is because outdoor warning systems are meant to warn the public of threatening weather. And if the public is going to respond to a warning siren, they have to have confidence that there's a threat. And if you have different practices for how you test your sirens and operate your sirens, you undermine public confidence in the systems. So if you are someone who lives in a community with a warning system and you are traveling to another area who has a warning system and they operate it differently, you may not know how to behave or react when there's threatening weather, or you may not even know it's just a test. So we recognize this as an issue in Georgia, and we spent time addressing it by standardizing the practices and uses of outdoor warning systems. And so this was an effort where I brought together emergency managers from the local Emergency Management Association in Georgia and the warning coordination meteorologists from the 6 different offices to both generate guidance on threatening weather levels that should trigger outdoor warning systems, and to standardize testing practices so that wherever you go, you know exactly when that siren sounds what it means to you, because it's the same practice across the state. But that's not done everywhere. Many states don't have standardized practices. Many states use outdoor warning sirens for other reasons. For example, I was recently at the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and I was in my room, and at 10:30 at night, the tornado siren went off. And I was like, well, it's a clear sky, so it's not a threatening weather event. And it's 10:30 at night, so that doesn't sound like the time you would test a siren system, so what are they doing? So the next day in class, I went to one of the instructors and asked, and they said that basically they use their outdoor warning system for local firefighting volunteers. And when there's an incident where they need to bring volunteers, they sound the siren. So, you know, coming from Georgia, where they use the system in the way that we had crafted it, I just had no idea what that was. So it threw me off. And I didn't know what they were doing with their siren. So there's still a need throughout areas that have warning systems to kind of coordinate practices amongst differing jurisdictions so that the public can have a greater level of confidence and understanding in the systems. Another role I played was to serve on the Georgia Storm Ready Advisory Board for Georgia. Our job was to receive applications for storm ready programs, approve them, review them, approve them, but also to think creatively about other ways we can try to instill readiness measures with local emergency management jurisdictions and local communities. So we talked a lot about Storm Ready Supporter Program and other things that we can do to kind of improve or increase the number of jurisdictions participating in the program. So again, because I was state meteorologist, this was just a natural fit for me for Georgia, and I believe that storm ready advisory boards exist in all states. So anytime that there's a state meteorologist, I think this is a natural fit for them. Let's see, there's emergency response exercises. Emergency management organizations are required, if they receive federal dollars, to conduct 4 exercises a year. That is a requirement by the Emergency Management Program grant. And so I think at least one of those exercises needs to be either a functional or full-scale exercise. So in Georgia, most of our functional or full-scale exercises were about hurricane scenarios, because Georgia felt that a major hurricane hitting the coast was their biggest potential disaster for the state. If they looked at all different hazard scenarios, a Category 4 hurricane hitting the coast was probably the most likely to produce the largest scale disaster that they would ever face. So they spent a lot of time investing in exercises to help them get ready for hurricanes. And so my job as the state meteorologist was to create the scenarios for these exercises, to work with the National Hurricane Center staff, our local National Weather Service warning coordination meteorologists, and create the scenario and create that scenario information and provide it to the exercise planners. And so all of the weather-related information that existed within the exercise was created by me, and in coordination with the Weather Service partners. So that's another area where staff meteorologist has an important role. This isn't anything to do with real-time forecast information, but it's certainly weather-related, and certainly they have the best level expertise to create a realistic scenario that genuinely adds benefit to the exercise effort. And so I definitely feel that's an area where meteorologists need to be integrated. And lastly, one of the things that I did there was to participate with a group called the Georgia Silver Jackets. Silver Jackets are kind of sponsored out of the Army Corps of Engineers. They exist around the nation. I don't have a good grasp on exactly where all these programs exist, but I know that many states have them. And essentially all they're trying to do is help improve our ability to prepare communities for flood events. Flooding tends to be one of the most impactful and common hazard events that occurs throughout the nation, one of the costliest when you look at damage figures across the nation. So flood preparedness is a major effort on the national and state level. And so this is just kind of a group of organizations that come together. They look at floodplain maps, they look at flood practices, and they look for opportunities to increase the effectiveness of these programs. One example I can give is they were trying to, in Georgia when I was there, they were trying to look at how real-time flood information was being put out to the public when flood events were occurring. And they wanted to create kind of this dynamic mapping product that would show, given this exact scenario, what structures do they expect to be inundated, and then can we use that information to do advanced alert and warning practices that would target the people who they anticipate could be flooded by the event, and then get them out of harm's way before the floodwaters get there. I don't know whatever happened with that effort, but if it's not going on, it needs to be, because that would be a fantastic product. So just again, anytime there's an opportunity to jump into the hazards realm in a way that uses the meteorological expertise, excellent opportunity for a state meteorologist. And again, without that level of expertise in a state program or a local program, they're not going to have as much bang for their buck and not as much value in that effort without having someone who's really genuinely connected to the meteorological community. That does it, and I think that takes me just about half an hour, so I guess we can open this up to questions.
Thank you, Chris. It looks like Luke has a question going back to the last slide. How did they come up with Silver Jackets as their mascot for that team?
That's a really, really great question. I'm not positive. I think some of the people that founded it went to Georgia Tech, and they're the Yellow Jackets as their mascot, but don't quote me on that. I don't know if that's true or not, but really good question. Is there anything else?
It looks like Courtney and Matt both have a question. We'll start with Courtney. Her question is, what prompted Georgia to create this position?
Well, Georgia is within FEMA Region 4, and FEMA Region 4 at the time had Brock Long as their hurricane program manager. And Brock was probably one of the best minds to work in the hurricane program realm that I think anyone has seen. Just a very capable, intelligent, visionary type person. And I think it was a lot to do with him influencing the program to bolster their level of readiness for weather events, specifically in the area of hurricanes. When I came on board, the state didn't have a hurricane plan. If you can imagine hurricanes being their greatest threat, and they don't have a plan to respond to one. So I think Brock recognized that, and he worked with the people at Georgia Emergency Management to create the position because he understood that someone on staff would be there to integrate in the ways needed that I did, such as creating the state hurricane plan, being the local meteorologist, etc. So my understanding is Brock worked with leadership at GEMA to identify that as a need and help them create the position.
Very cool. And then Matt has a question. Do you believe the state meteorologist is necessary for every state, or only larger ones with multiple weather offices or a wider array of natural hazards?
I think that every state should have a state meteorologist. 100% agree on that. We have threatening weather everywhere across the nation. It doesn't matter where you live. There is threatening weather of some form or fashion, whether it be winter weather, tropical weather, severe weather, severe, tornadic thunderstorms. I'm not aware of any place that doesn't have some type of hazard that results in or stems from weather. And if you look at I can't remember, they used to be called the National Climatic Data Center. I can't recall what they're called now. But they did some research on billion-dollar disasters. And this research wasn't necessarily weather-related. It was just billion-dollar disasters. And if you look at it, essentially almost every disaster that's there is weather-related. So the vast majority of disasters that the nation faces are stemming from weather incidents. And so I think having that onboard meteorologist is something that is a valuable asset and tool. You want to be able to get the weather-related information that you need when you need it as a decision maker, especially when you're in instant response mode. You are busy, you are stressed, you are trying to respond to the needs of the community. The last thing you need is bad information or delays in getting it. So I see numerous reasons why a staff meteorologist is a vital role or a vital position to have, especially at the state level. So I completely agree that a state meteorologist in every state would be a valuable asset. That was a good question.
And then Chris, I had a question for you also. Do you have any advice, I guess, for those meteorology students who are here, as far as how to get yourself in a position, as either a hurricane liaison or even a state meteorologist? We heard your background, but do you have any kind of words of wisdom for those who want to kind of follow that path?
Yeah, I do. I will start off by saying that we are still really in a state across the nation where emergency managers being integrated into, meteorologists being integrated into emergency management organizations is not a common practice. So there are not a tremendous number of opportunities out there that I'm aware of. I didn't realize at the time what I had gotten when I received the job at Georgia. So I want to be clear and set expectations for the students that there aren't a tremendous number of opportunities out there. They're hard to come by. So if you want that type of work, if you want to be someone who's involved with emergency management and a meteorologist, then your saving grace, the thing that will get you there is to have built relationships with people in the industry and find out where those opportunities exist. You know, I was fortunate to have built a relationship with Brock from FEMA Region 4 and their hurricane program manager in FEMA Region 6, and to establish those relationships, because that is how I became aware of the job opportunity in Georgia. And it was Brock who sat on my interview panel that probably voted for me to get the job over other candidates. So those relationships are what got me where I am. And so for students who are interested in trying to get opportunities within emergency management organizations, then get to know your emergency managers and get to know where those opportunities exist. Find your state office, go talk to someone in that state office and ask them if they have a state meteorologist position, or if they have someone that with a background in weather would be a fit there, and find out what that opportunity is. I think oftentimes in emergency management offices, those positions are planning positions. So I was writing hazard annexes to the state plan, like their flood response plan, their hurricane response plan, their severe storm response plan. That was my job. I was hired as their hurricane planner and state meteorologist. I wasn't hired solely as their state meteorologist. So that's the other piece of advice I'd give, is broaden your skill set. If you want to do something that's cross-disciplinary, then you need to understand both disciplines. And so if you're a meteorology student and you're at a school with an emergency management program, then try to get an emergency management certificate. Also, the Emergency Management Institute has online free courses. There are certain classes that you need to take to be an emergency responder, like ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800. You can take those classes for free and get your certificates, and that's a resume builder. And internships. Anytime you can get an internship, whether it be with the Weather Service or with someone else, do that. Take that opportunity, find that opportunity, go create that opportunity, because you need to have a pretty nicely looking, polished resume to submit to that state level organization if you're going to have a chance to get that job, because you're competing. So build every bit of experience you can in advance by getting the education you need, getting any experience you can through internships, and by building relationships with the people who work in these organizations. And keep in mind, I was going to school in Oklahoma. I got a job in Georgia, and I never saw myself moving to Georgia, but when the job opportunity came, it was work I wanted to do. So if you are someone who really wants to be a meteorologist and get integrated into emergency management, you're going to have to accept the idea that you may be moving far, far away and it's not where you thought you'd move. So you're going to have to be flexible. I moved across the country and back, and that's what it took for me to get in that role. So it's not an easy road, but it is a road. So just do the upfront work you can so that as soon as you get that degree, you are as marketable as possible.
Thank you. Also, it looks like Matt has a question. He wants to know more about the duties in your current position. So, is there any crossover from your time at in Georgia to what you're doing now?
Yes, actually there is. That's a good question. Now, I'm currently an emergency management coordinator. I'm not an emergency management coordinator and meteorologist. I wasn't hired because of my meteorological background. I was hired because of my emergency management background. However, as I mentioned before, most of the incidents we face are weather related. So because I am a meteorologist and have a background as a meteorologist and a background as a meteorologist in emergency management, anytime we have threatening weather here, I'm usually the first person that alerts the staff here that I've seen something in the forecast. And I'm talking with our leadership about the forecast models and the type of weather event we may be looking at. And I'm also the person that creates the weather outlooks to send out to our fellow emergency management organizations to alert them. So within Washington County, we have city emergency management programs, and we have special district emergency management programs. And so we create kind of a weather outlook that we send out to them. And we do that because I'm a meteorologist and I can, but that's not something they did before. So anytime you're a meteorologist, people will take advantage of those skills. As long as you understand that your job is to create a product for your audience, and that audience needs to know threatening level information, threatening forecast information. They don't need to know it's going to be a sunny day tomorrow. They need to know if we're going to get enough rain for a flood. And so your job is to really be kind of always looking for that in the forecast, looking ahead, keeping an eye out. You know, you're that sentry person who is the one who is on the leading edge knows the most information about weather and is looking and can identify those events when they arise in the 7-day forecast or even the 10-day forecast. It may not happen in the 10-day forecast, but at least you've seen something there that's a little alarming and you want to make sure people know about it. So I've been able to do that here. They didn't bring me on to do those roles, but they recognized I had that skill set and they're taking advantage of it. So there is that crossover.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any questions, so I just want to say thank you again to everybody who joined us today. Oh, one last question here, Chris. What kind of software?
Oh yeah.
What kind of software tools do you use?
Oh, that's a really, really great question. I don't use any software tools. No, I'm just kidding. So I will jump back to Georgia for a minute before I come here to Washington County. In Georgia, for hurricane forecast information, the federal government created a product called HurVac, and HurVac is hurricane evacuation. It's an amalgamation of those two words, and it's a software that plots the current forecast information and gives a lot of risk assessment type information in the tool. So I use that a lot there. I use Google Earth because I like to overlay forecast information with jurisdictional information. So I like to be able to take a Google map, ingest a KML of our county boundary, and then overlay on top of that forecast, like what is our quantitative precipitation forecast for this approaching storm? Are we going to get 3 inches of rain in the county or 10? They're calling for 10, but is 10 in Washington County or is it in neighboring Clackamas County or neighboring Yamhill County? Where exactly is that 10 inches forecasted for? So I'll overlay the two and create that map, and then I'll output that map in my heads-up email, if you will. In Georgia, I use GIS to do exactly the same thing, and I use GIS to plot other more planning level information about risk information, you know, like if we have a Category 4 hurricane, here's how far inland tropical storm force winds could reach. Plot that on a map, share it as part of the hurricane plan. So ArcGIS was a tool that I use, and ArcGIS, GIS is basically going to continue to grow, continue to become more important, continue to be utilized by all levels of organizations that have connections to emergency management. Anytime you can create a map that aligns weather and hazard information with the target audience's information, like where they have their resources stored, where they're located, etc., those things are really valuable. So I would encourage people to learn GIS if they can. Let's see, what else? I use models a lot, so I've experimented with different private sector tools that can give you more focused views of model products. So there are some private sector tools out there that will allow you to ingest a forecast, and then you can zoom in so you can see your county in relation to the forecast, whereas a lot of the kind of National Weather Service products are kind of, their maps are kind of set, so it gives you a flexibility in how you view forecast information and how you brief that forecast information to people. So there's some private sector tools out there that are really neat. I'm trying to think if I can explicitly say which one of those I use. Let me go in here for a second. There's one called Sinew AWIPS that's really good. It's a private sector, costs almost nothing, gives you like an AWIPS-like experience. So AWIPS is the tool that National Weather Service forecasters use for their forecast information. So we don't have access to that as private citizens, but this Sinew AWIPS is a very similar version that you can access online. That's a very cool tool. Oh, and lastly, I'll highlight Google My Maps. So Google My Maps is just like Google Earth, except it's a Google Maps version of it that allows you to interact with it. So you can ingest KMLs to plot information on the map. You can create your own information on the map. You can draw lines, polygons. You can create maps. And so anytime you can show how something may be impacted by weather on a map, I highly encourage you to learn how to do that. Yeah, I think that's it. Good question.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Matt, for that question. So if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank everybody for joining us for our final virtual seminar of the semester. And I really want to thank Chris for taking the time out of his day and developing this presentation and spending time with us and giving us more insight into the integration of meteorology and emergency management. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.